The check tore with a sound like a small gunshot in that marble lobby, and for one full second nobody moved, not the men whose name was on it, not the crowd of phones already filming, not even the woman holding the two halves like she'd just realized what she'd done. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Andre Callahan had been up since 4:30 that morning, same as most mornings, checking a joist under a porch he was rebuilding out in Chesterfield County before the homeowner's kids woke up and started asking him questions he didn't have time to answer. He still had sawdust in the creases of his knuckles when he parked outside the Globex Global Banking branch on Carey Street a little after 11. He hadn't gone home to change. He'd told himself he would, and then the truck's clock kept moving faster than he expected, and by the time he thought about it again he was already 2 blocks from the bank with his daughter's tuition deadline sitting in his head like a stone. His daughter, Zuri, was 15 and wanted to go to a math and science magnet school 2 counties over, the kind of school that cost more than Andre made in 3 good months, and for 2 years he had told her, gently, that they'd figure something out. He hadn't told her what figuring something out actually meant, because it meant a piece of land that had been sitting in his family for 4 generations, land his great-grandfather had bought back when black men in Virginia buying land at all was its own kind of miracle, land that had been farmed and then half forgotten and then, this spring, wanted very badly by a solar energy company that needed acreage with the right sun exposure and the right access roads. The offer had started at $2 million. Andre's cousin Ottilie, who'd gone to law school and never let anyone forget it, had told him to wait, and he had waited, through 4 rounds of negotiation and 1 lawyer who quit and 1 who didn't, until the number that finally landed on the table was $11 million. He hadn't touched a cent of it yet. That was the whole reason he was standing in the bank that day, holding a check that felt, in his hand, like it weighed more than the actual paper should. The land itself sat about 40 minutes south of the city, past a gas station that had changed names 3 times in Andre's life but never its faded blue awning, past a church his grandmother used to walk to on Sundays even after her knees gave her trouble. Andre had grown up half believing the land was more trouble than it was worth. There were years his father argued with 2 different cousins over fence lines, years the property taxes ate into money that should have gone toward groceries, one bad summer when a flood took out most of the tobacco his uncle had tried, foolishly, to keep planting long after tobacco stopped making sense as a crop. But his grandfather used to say the land wasn't about what it grew. It was about the fact that nobody could tell you to get off it. Andre hadn't fully understood that as a kid. He understood it better now, raising Zuri alone in a rented duplex where the landlord raised the rent every spring like clockwork and Andre never had much standing to argue about it. He'd almost turned the solar company down twice, actually, in the early rounds, mostly out of some stubborn instinct that selling felt like giving something up rather than gaining something. It was Zuri, of all people, who'd talked him around, sitting at the kitchen table one night with her homework spread out next to a printout of the offer letter, saying, in that blunt way 15-year-olds have of cutting through an adult's overthinking, that Grandpa Cornelius didn't hold onto that land so it could sit empty forever. He held onto it so that someday somebody in the family could actually choose what to do with it instead of just surviving on it. Andre had sat with that for a week before calling Ottilie back. The teller who first took it from him was a young man named Perce Okafor, new enough to the branch that he still double-checked everything against a laminated card taped to his register, and when he saw the number on the check he did the thing every teller is trained to do with anything over $10,000, he excused himself, walked it to the back, and asked for a manager to verify. The manager on duty that morning was Garnet Voss, and she had not had a good month. 3 weeks earlier, a different branch 2 miles away had been hit by a check-washing scam that cost the bank almost $400,000 before anyone caught it, and Garnet's regional office had sent out a memo, then a second memo, then a mandatory training video that everyone had to click through and sign off on. She had watched it twice. She had also, personally, missed a red flag on a much smaller fraudulent check back in the spring, a mistake that had cost her a formal write-up and a very uncomfortable conversation with her district manager, a man named Foster Wexler who she respected and was, if she was honest with herself, a little afraid of disappointing again. Garnet had been at the Carey Street branch for 6 years, long enough to know most of the regulars by name, long enough to have watched 2 of her tellers get promoted out from under her while she stayed put, managing a branch that corporate kept talking about consolidating with a bigger one across town. She wasn't unkind by nature. She'd covered a coworker's shift the week his mother was in the hospital, she'd quietly waived overdraft fees for an elderly customer more times than she was technically supposed to, and she genuinely liked the small, steady rhythm of a neighborhood branch, the way you got to know whose kid was starting college and whose husband had just gotten laid off. But 6 weeks of tightened scrutiny from corporate, on top of a write-up she still hadn't fully shaken off, had put a version of her on duty that morning that wasn't entirely herself, the version that checked the same figure 3 times and still didn't trust it. So when Perce brought her Andre's check, her first instinct wasn't curiosity. It was dread. She looked at the amount. $11 million, written out in full, the kind of number that almost never crossed her counter, issued from a solar development company she didn't recognize, made out to a man in a paint-flecked work shirt and jeans with a company logo stitched crooked on the sleeve, no appointment, no advance notice from wealth management, nothing in the system flagging an incoming transfer of that size. She pulled up the account. Andre's name was there, but the account had been opened only 4 months earlier, and the address on file didn't quite match what was printed on the check's memo line, because his lawyer had used his old Petersburg address on some of the original paperwork before the family moved. None of that was proof of anything. It was the kind of small mismatch a calmer week would have made her pick up the phone about. But Garnet had spent 3 weeks with her stomach in a knot every time a large check came across her desk, and something about the mismatch, stacked on top of the training video, stacked on top of the write-up, stacked on top of a man standing there in work boots holding what looked, to her exhausted eyes, like the plot of every scam memo she'd read that month, made her decide, in about 4 seconds, that she was not going to be the manager who let this one through. "Sir, I'm going to need to hold this," she said, and her voice came out flatter and colder than she meant it to. "This doesn't match our verification standards." Andre frowned. "It's a real check. My lawyer walked it through with the company's finance office personally. Call the number on it." "I understand you believe that," Garnet said, and even as the words left her mouth she heard how they sounded, and some part of her flinched, but she didn't stop. "We've had incidents recently with large checks that appear legitimate. I have to follow protocol." By now a small crowd had gathered the way small crowds do in banks, people waiting in line who suddenly weren't in a hurry anymore, a couple of them already lifting their phones because something about a raised voice near a teller counter has a gravity all its own. Andre felt the eyes on him and felt something old and tired settle into his chest, the specific tiredness of being a large black man in a room where people were already deciding what kind of trouble he must be, and he kept his voice level because he had learned a long time ago that raising it would only prove whatever story was already forming behind their eyes. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said. "I'm asking you to call the number." Garnet didn't call the number. What she did instead, in a moment she would spend a long time trying to understand about herself afterward, was decide that the safest thing, the protocol-approved thing, was to void the item in front of him so there was no chance of it being deposited or altered before verification could happen. She had done it before with smaller suspicious items. It was in the manual. She took the check in both hands, said something about it being flagged for review, and tore it down the middle before anyone, including her, fully registered what was happening. The sound of it seemed to take up the whole lobby. That was the moment Foster Wexler came around the corner from the manager's office, moving faster than a 61-year-old man in dress shoes usually moves on marble, because he had spent the last 20 minutes on the phone with the solar company's finance director confirming, line by line, a wire authorization tied to a name he recognized the second Perce had typed it into the internal review queue that morning. Foster had cleared it himself less than an hour earlier. He had actually been on his way out to introduce himself. "Wait, sir, wait," he called out, reaching for the counter, but he was still 10 feet away when the paper gave. For a second the whole lobby just stood there. Andre looked down at the 2 halves lying on the counter like something had died there. Garnet looked at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. Foster stopped in front of Andre, out of breath, and said the 2 words that would end up in half a dozen phone videos before the day was over. "Sir. I am so sorry." He turned to Garnet, not with anger exactly, more with the flat disbelief of a man watching a mistake happen in real time that he'd have given anything to stop 3 seconds earlier. "Garnet, that check was verified. I confirmed it myself this morning with the issuing company's CFO." Garnet's face went through something complicated. She didn't argue. She just looked at the torn check and then at Andre, and for a moment nobody in the lobby said anything at all, because apologies that come after damage is done have a strange, heavy silence to them that nobody quite knows how to fill. "I'll fix this," Foster said, to Andre, and then, quieter, to Garnet, "We'll talk." What happened over the next hour wasn't dramatic. There was no instant miracle, no envelope of cash slid across the counter, no camera crew waiting outside. Foster walked Andre into his office, apologized again without hedging it, and got the solar company's finance office on the phone right there so Andre could hear with his own ears that the funds were real and that a replacement check, along with a formal letter, would be issued the next business day, wired if he preferred, faster and safer than paper. Andre sat in a chair that was a little too soft for him and listened to a stranger 3 states away confirm, patiently, that his land really had sold for $11 million, that this had never been in question, that the only thing that had happened was a bank employee's bad morning colliding with his bad luck. Andre didn't smile much through any of it. He wasn't a man who smiled easily even on good days, and this hadn't felt like a good day yet. What he mostly felt, sitting there, was the specific exhaustion of having to prove something twice that should only have needed proving once. He thought about Zuri, waiting at the kitchen table with her laptop open to the magnet school's enrollment portal, refreshing it every hour like the numbers might change if she looked hard enough. He thought about how he was going to explain this to her without making it sound worse than it was, because he'd made a habit, since her mother left, of never making things sound worse to Zuri than they had to be. Garnet came to the office door before he left. She didn't come in right away. She stood in the doorway for a second, and when Andre looked up she said, simply, "I was wrong. Not just about the check. About you, before I even looked at the check. I want you to know I see that." Andre didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't, not entirely, and he wasn't the kind of man who handed out forgiveness just to make a room more comfortable. But he also didn't need her to suffer for it. "You scared, or you tired?" he asked, and it wasn't really a question so much as an offer of a door out. "Both," Garnet admitted. "That's not an excuse." "No," Andre said. "But it's honest. I'll take honest." That was as far as it went that day. No hug, no dramatic forgiveness speech. Just 2 tired adults in a bank office at noon on a Tuesday, one of them holding half a torn check in each hand like a strange kind of souvenir. The videos, of course, went everywhere by that evening, the torn check, the crowd, Foster's shout of "Sir" that people clipped and captioned 100 different ways. Some of the comments were about race, and some of them were about banking policy, and a lot of them were about nothing in particular except how satisfying it is to watch someone in a uniform get caught being wrong out loud. Andre didn't read most of them. He wasn't a man who lived much online, and he had a porch to finish and a daughter's enrollment deadline that was now, mercifully, no longer a crisis. What actually mattered happened 3 days later, when the replacement funds cleared and Andre sat down with Ottilie and, for the first time since his grandfather died, let himself think seriously about what $11 million could actually do. He paid Zuri's tuition in full, first, before anything else, and watched her read the confirmation email out loud twice like she didn't trust it the first time. She hugged him in the kitchen, quick and a little embarrassed the way teenagers hug their fathers, and then went right back to pretending she hadn't been worried about any of it, which was its own kind of relief for Andre to watch. Then he did something that surprised even Ottilie. Instead of selling off the rest of the family's remaining land to a developer who'd been circling it for a year, he put a portion of the money into building 6 small, well-built homes on a corner of it, homes meant for families in the county who'd been priced out of everything within 20 miles, sold at cost, no profit built in, because he remembered what it had meant, growing up, that his family had land when so many others didn't, and he wanted that particular kind of security to belong to more people than just his own. Ottilie thought he was being sentimental about it, and told him so more than once, but she also drew up the paperwork without charging him for half of it, which he noticed and never mentioned, because some things between family don't need saying out loud. He hired most of the crew from men he already knew from job sites around the county, guys who'd worked with him on porches and additions for years and never gotten the chance to build something that was theirs to be proud of from the ground up. The work took most of the fall and into the winter, and Andre was out there most mornings himself, in the same work boots, checking the same kinds of joists, because $11 million hadn't changed what he actually liked doing with his hands, it had just changed what he got to build. Garnet Voss kept her job, though not without consequence. She went through a formal review, sat through a retraining course she didn't fight, and asked, on her own, to be the one who called Andre personally to walk him through the new verification safeguards the branch put in place afterward, ones that made sure no single employee, however stressed, would ever again be the last line of judgment on a check that large. She and Andre spoke maybe 4 times over the following months, always about logistics, never quite friends, but something had shifted between them that neither one tried to name. The last time she saw him in person, he was there to open an account for one of the new home's first residents, a woman named Perpetua Anders who used to clean office buildings at night and now had a mortgage with her name on it instead of a landlord's. Garnet handled the paperwork herself, carefully, twice checked, and when she handed it over she didn't apologize again, because she'd already done that, and Andre didn't need to hear it a second time. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. Foster Wexler retired the following spring, and at his small send-off in the branch break room, someone asked him, half joking, what the strangest moment of his career had been. He said it without hesitating, standing in a lobby, 10 feet too far away, watching $11 million tear in half in real time. He said he thought about it more than people would expect, not because of the money, but because of how close an ordinary Tuesday had come to becoming a much smaller, quieter kind of injustice, the kind that never makes it onto anyone's phone, the kind that just settles into a person's memory of how they were treated and never gets undone. Comment: kindness still exists, if you believe even one good act can change someone's life. Andre still works 6 days a week. The $11 million didn't make him stop building porches or checking joists at 4:30 in the morning, and he never expected it to. It just meant Suri got to walk into her first day at the magnet school without either of them lying awake the night before doing math about tuition. What stayed with him longest wasn't the torn check or the apology or even the 6 houses going up on his family's land. It was something smaller, the ordinary, unglamorous work of 2 people, one who'd been wronged and one who'd done the wronging, choosing, slowly and without an audience, to actually look at each other again. Kindness, it turns out, rarely arrives as a single grand gesture. More often it's a second conversation nobody filmed, a check reissued without a fuss, a mortgage handled with extra care, a man deciding not to carry his anger any further than it needed to go. That's the part worth remembering, long after the video stops trending.